Towards the end of his life, I saw him 3 times. I drove to Idaho to see him twice, and then once back here. And when I was in Idaho, he didn't tell me all that much, but he did tell me one interesting thing that never made sense until this year when I find out, you know, the information I'm getting is just growing exponentially. Every time I get someplace, you know, then I'm led to someplace else, and it's just so much information coming in. Anyway, what he told me was that he worked on a project, a mining machine for the moon. And this thing was being built in the south somewhere. He didn't tell me where, but, you know, I'm imagining Arkansas or Alabama, someplace like that. He said, John, this thing was so big. He said that when I finished it, he said, I have a private license. I rented an airplane just to go up and fly around to see how mammoth this thing was. And I said, well, can you give me an idea? He says, acres. I said, wow. I said, how'd they get it to the moon? And he said, I don't know. And that's how projects like that work. He doesn't have a need to know how they got it to the moon. His job was to build it, you know, and they're not going to tell him any of that. That's how compartmentalization works.
So tell us how the moon got where it is, because you know that the moon is a satellite that's actually a fake.
Right. It's a spaceship. It was towed into orbit, I would say, 30 to 40,000 years ago. Now, the reason I say 30 to 40,000 years ago is because it's still within the history of man. Velikovsky talks about the different proselenes and the different civilizations that talked about the time when there was no moon, and then when there was 2 moons, and now we have 1 moon. This guy here, Norm Bergman, wrote The Ringmakers of Saturn. It's an excellent book. Norm Bergman is very qualified, was for 40 years a scientific part of both NACA and also Lockheed. Retired from Lockheed, I think, about 15 years ago. No,
What's
more than
NACA?
that. National Aeronautics, the predecessor to NASA.
Oh, really?
But when he retired, he somehow got some photos, some really good negatives of Voyager, which went by Saturn. And he's set up a little lab in his house, and he started looking these. And he ended up writing Ringmakers of Saturn, and what he shows you here is what he found in the rings of Saturn is 3 vehicles, spaceships, the biggest of which is 31,496 miles long and 2,422 miles in diameter. We're talking about a fairly large spaceship there. Now, Norm Bergman, when he wrote this book at the beginning, it's very good. He says, now look, he says, I'm going to be talking about some stuff that is very interesting, but you can't skip a page, you can't skip a word that you don't know. You have to go from the beginning to end, or you won't understand what I'm saying. And I did go from beginning to end. Now,
Okay, but when was this written?
This would be 1986.
Okay, so it's not that old.
No. And I go see Norm.
And it's talking about a huge spaceship.
In the rings of Saturn.
Spaceship?
Who built them?
Yeah.
We don't know who built them. But anyway,
Us?
no. We couldn't build anything like that. We have some amazing stuff, but we couldn't do that.
Okay.
No, this is somebody else. But what the interesting part in the book, and the reason why we're getting here, is because at the end of this book, he starts talking about the moon and how the moon was towed into orbit. Because the people that operate that stuff in Saturn and also Iapetus towed the moon into orbit. And he goes into here and explains exactly why he believes the moon was towed into orbit and how it was and how they grabbed on to the Mare Orientale.
Who are you saying towed the moon?
Whoever. We don't
place?
know.
So he doesn't conjecture on who,
No.
On what alien race, for example.
No.
I mean, obviously it's an alien race.
No.
Henry Deacon, our secret source, has also substantiated that the moon was towed into orbit. But have you got an idea what alien race was responsible for that?
No, absolutely not.
None.
So anyway, I go to see Norm 2 years ago, and in talking with him, I said, by the way, the electromagnetic vehicle that towed the moon into orbit, where is it now? And he said, I think it's on the backside of the moon. So when I got hooked up with Ron Schmidt, we started collecting photos on the backside of the moon, and we found it. It's in the crater Tchaikovsky. And the story of how we did it was so interesting, and how NASA covered it up. There's, like 6 different photos of Tchaikovsky as they tried to airbrush this electromagnetic vehicle out of the picture by making it an island. But we got them. And we got 2 really good photos. Anyway, one more thing I'm going to tell you about Norm, because we're going to get it into it. But anyway, let's see Norm, and he's not well, and he's had several surgeries, and I expect any day to hear that he's passed away. He's 87, and I said, Norm, I said, I'm thinking that the airplanes that crashed into the World Trade Center were holographs. And he said, John, you're probably right, and here's why. He said, just before I retired, I was driving down on the Bayshore Freeway to Sunnyvale, and he said I had a friend in the right seat of the car, and he says, it was about 8 o'clock in the morning, maybe 8:15. He said, we're driving south, and we saw this shadow, and we looked up, and here, he says, it wasn't a 747, but it was a huge 4-engine airplane. It wasn't 200 feet above us. And he said, we looked out and looked at this thing, and he said, of course, we're, 20 miles from San Jose, and 30 miles from San Francisco. There's no possible way an airplane could, legitimately be flying right there. And he says, we watched it for about 10 seconds, and it went just like you turned a light bulb out. And he said, if that was the contemporary holograph, presentation of a holograph, he says, then you're right. And,
that's
the
very interesting.
The holographic technology is so far advanced that people just wouldn't believe it. But the other day I had a lady here that was helping Marilee on a casting program. Actually, she hired Marilee. She was from New York. She had 2 degrees from Harvard. She was just a wonderful, smart, receptive lady. And we were talking about holographs. She says, well, let me tell you. He said, about 5 years ago, I was invited with about 15 other television executives into a private showing in Hollywood. And there was a little auditorium. It wasn't very big. It could seat like maybe 30 people. And the presentation was called The Future of Television. And she said, I don't remember if Steven Spielberg was there, but, everybody else was. And she said it was, brightly lit. And there was a stage and a podium on the stage, and we're sitting there, and this guy comes out from behind, and he's a kind of East German accent, East European accent, white hair, has glasses, and he comes out and he starts telling us the history of television and how they came up with the first cathode ray tube, and how they did this and how they did that, and he walks down in front of the stage, walks up one of the aisles, he's polishing his glasses, walks back up to the stage, and she says it was pretty boring. She says after about 20 minutes, he wraps it up with something, and that's the history of television. He puts his glasses on, and just like a light.
He disappeared? He was a hologram?
Yeah.